The Grand Canyon is a huge crack in the earth, so ancient and gigantic that it seems to hide secrets we can never solve. Its beauty is breathtaking, but behind it lurks something terrifying. Among all the national parks in the United States, this canyon is the most dangerous. Over 100 years, more than 1,000 people have disappeared here without a trace. From February 2018 to June 2023 alone, over 1,100 disappearances were recorded. Every year, the canyon claims about 12 lives, as if deciding who to drag into its depths forever. Get ready to hear some frightening stories about newlyweds whose daring rafting trip down the Colorado River ended in mysterious disappearance, about an experienced tourist who vanished on a desert plateau without a trace, and about a guide who disappeared right before everyone's eyes, as if the canyon had swallowed him, leaving only questions without answers. Autumn 1928, America was living in the roaring 20s, an era of jazz, prohibition, and boundless, sometimes reckless optimism. At a time when it seemed that any record could be broken and any boundary overcome, newlyweds Glenn and Bessie Hyde decided to seal their union not with a traditional honeymoon, but with a daring challenge to one of the most formidable forces of nature on the continent. Glenn, a 29-year-old farmer from Idaho, and his 22-year-old wife Bessie, a budding poet and artist, set themselves an ambitious goal: to make a high-speed descent down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. Their vessel was a 20-foot flat-bottomed boat that Glenn had built himself, a crude but, he believed, reliable craft for conquering the turbulent rapids. Their undertaking was not just an adventure. If successful, they would go down in history. Glenn would have set a new speed record for traversing the canyon, and Bessie, much more important for the headlines, would have become the first woman to conquer the river. It was a bold move that could have brought them fame and perhaps financial prosperity. They began their journey in Green River, Utah, and by mid-November had reached the depths of the Grand Canyon. They were last seen alive on November 18, 1928. They were met by Emery Kolb, a legendary photographer and one of the most experienced river guides of the time, who ran a studio on the edge of the canyon with his brother. The meeting took place in the heart of the canyon, and Kolb later recalled details that, in hindsight, took on a sinister tone. He noted that the couple did not have life jackets, a fatal oversight for a river known for its icy and unpredictable waters. Moreover, Kolb detected a note of doubt in Bessie's voice. According to him, she seemed hesitant, her initial enthusiasm dampened by the harsh and overwhelming reality of the canyon. This fleeting encounter, captured in Kolb's photograph, was the last documented contact with the couple. After that, they disappeared into the silence of the canyon. A month passed. The alarm grew. On December 19th, as winter began to blanket the canyon with frost, their boat was discovered by a search party that included Emery Kolb himself. It was drifting at River Mile 237, completely empty. The discovery was both encouraging and chilling. The boat was in perfect condition, undamaged and neatly moored. Everything inside was in its place: supplies, food, clothing, and even Bessie's personal diary, which, however, contained no entries after her meeting with Kolb. It was as if Glenn and Bessie had simply stepped ashore for a moment and vanished, leaving behind a perfectly preserved scene of their last voyage. The absence of bodies and the undamaged boat immediately gave rise to a whirlwind of theories, each more intriguing than the last. The simplest explanation, accidental drowning, seemed unlikely. How could they have drowned without damaging their boat, which was found intact? Another, more plausible theory suggested that the boat could have broken loose from its mooring during the night while they slept on the shore. Upon waking and discovering their boat was missing, they would have found themselves trapped in one of the most inaccessible parts of the canyon, with no way out, doomed to a slow death from starvation and exposure. However, over time, the story began to take on darker, almost mythical details. Rumors emerged that Glenn was a cruel and sometimes violent husband, leading to speculation about murder disguised as an accident. This theory took an unexpected and dramatic turn in 1971. During one of the commercial river rafting trips, an elderly woman named Elizabeth Cutler after hearing the story of the Hydes from the guide, suddenly claimed that she was Bessie Hyde. She claimed that she had stabbed her husband to death during an argument and fled the canyon. However, she later recanted her story, leaving everyone baffled and adding another layer of mystery to the case. But the most compelling and enduring theory that turned the Hydes' disappearance into a true American myth involves another woman, Georgie Clark. Shortly after the Hydes disappeared, Georgie, a woman unknown to anyone, appeared on the river and became a pioneer of commercial rafting, effectively taking over the niche that Bessie had claimed. Clark was known for her secrecy and often told contradictory stories about her past. After her death in 1992, friends entered her home for the first time and made a shocking discovery. In her desk drawer, they found Glenn and Bessie Hyde's marriage certificate, as well as a birth certificate listing Georgie as Bessie DeRoss, Bessie Hyde's maiden name. Questions arose. Did Bessie kill her husband, escape from the canyon, and start a new life under the name Georgie Clark, fulfilling her dream of the river? Was her career built on a foundation of dark secrets? Historians and researchers have never been able to find conclusive evidence to support this theory, and many reject it. But the very existence of these documents, hidden in the home of a woman who became the Queen of the River, has forever cemented the Hyde case in the annals of American mysteries. This case became more than just a story about missing persons. It became a foundational myth about the dark allure of the Grand Canyon. In the pantheon of Grand Canyon tragedies, many stories begin with inexperience, with tourists in flip-flops who underestimated the steepness of the trail, or with those who ventured deep into the canyon with only a bottle of water. But the story of Floyd Roberts III is something else, something more disturbing. It is not a tale of ignorance, but a grim reminder that even experience, preparation, and a deep respect for the wilderness can be powerless in the face of a single wrong decision made under the pressure of a merciless force of nature. Floyd Roberts, a 52-year-old middle school teacher from Treasure Island, Florida, was no casual visitor. He was the complete opposite. His neighbors and friends described him as an intelligent, resourceful man and former NASA employee with excellent survival skills. He didn't just know about the Grand Canyon, he was fascinated by it. A map of the canyon hung in his home, evidence of a long-standing interest and presumably careful planning. He had been there before, knew its dangers, and respected its power. When he set out on his final hike in June 2016, he was not a tourist, but an experienced traveler ready for a serious challenge. The plan was ambitious, befitting his experience. Roberts and his companions intended to make a 9-day trek through one of the most remote and wild parts of the park, the Shivwitz Plateau in the western part of the Grand Canyon. These are not the tourist trails of the South Rim crowded with people. This is a harsh, arid, and difficult terrain where trails can be barely discernible and water sources are unreliable. Their route was to end with an exit from the canyon through Separation Canyon, a place whose very name speaks of isolation. On June 17, 2016, the first day of their journey, the group encountered the main enemy of any tourist in the Grand Canyon in the summer: heat. Official reports would later describe the weather conditions that day in one word: extreme. In such conditions, the human body works at its limit, and the price of any mistake increases many times over. And it was at this moment under the scorching Arizona sun that Floyd Roberts made a fateful decision. He separated from his group. The reasons for this decision remain unclear. Perhaps he wanted to move at a different pace, or explore a side canyon, or was simply confident in his ability to catch up with the group later. He was last seen near Kelly Tank, heading toward Trail Canyon, or 214-mile canyon, in the Shenley Springs area, moving toward the river. There was also a possibility that he could have descended into 209-mile canyon. He left alone, confident in his abilities, and was never seen again. When Roberts did not join the group at the appointed time, his companions became concerned. The next day, June 18th, they reported him missing and this marked the beginning of one of the largest and most intensive search operations in the park's recent history. The National Park Service immediately mobilized significant resources: ground teams from Grand Canyon, the neighboring Grand Canyon Parashant National Monument, and experienced search and rescue teams from Mojave and Coconino counties joined the search operation. They were supported from the air by a park helicopter and a specialized helitack team from Mesa Verde National Park. But the canyon was in no hurry to reveal its secrets. The search area covered more than 10 square miles, 25 square kilometers, of extremely difficult terrain. Rescuers faced the same hostile conditions that likely doomed Roberts. The grueling heat made working on the ground dangerous and required constant rotation of teams. The terrain was not just rugged, it was treacherous, covered with dense, thorny stands of pinyon, pine, and juniper that clung to clothing and limited visibility. The extreme remoteness of the area created serious communication and logistical problems. Transporting teams and equipment to the search area took several hours. A base camp was set up near Kelly Tanks, equipped with shade structures and water supplies to keep the rescuers going. For 6 long, grueling days, dozens of people combed the hostile terrain. A helicopter circled overhead, its blades breaking the silence of the canyon, while the eyes of pilots and observers scanned every ravine and shadow. Ground teams methodically searched the canyons and plateaus, but all their efforts were in vain. Not a single clue was found. No sign of Roberts, not his distinctive long-sleeved red shirt, not his large blue low-alpine backpack, not his white-framed sunglasses with orange lenses. Nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. On June 24th, after 6 days of fruitless searching, the operation's leadership made a difficult decision. The active search was called off and switched to permanent but limited mode. This is standard procedure in such cases, meaning that the targeted operation is suspended, but rangers and pilots will continue to search during routine patrols of the area. Flyers with Roberts' photo and description remained posted on information boards, a silent reminder of the unsolved mystery. In the weeks following the end of the active search phase, the disappearance of Floyd Roberts III became a topic of discussion not only among rangers and volunteers, but also in wider circles of anomaly researchers. Despite the official status of unresolved disappearance without a trace, neither his family nor his colleagues could accept the idea that an experienced hiker prepared for extreme conditions could vanish from an empty open plateau in the middle of a clear day. In such conditions, there was simply nowhere to disappear unnoticed. The terrain was flat and open, with slopes that could be seen from above and from the air, and not a single bush to hide in. Nevertheless, the man was gone. The testimony of the group members, especially Ned Bryant, remained key. He was the first to say that Floyd's behavior in his final moments seemed as if something was calling him down. These words sounded strange, not because he said them out loud, but because, according to Bryant, Floyd seemed to hear something that the others did not notice. He walked to the edge of a ditch, a shallow, rocky channel that had once carried meltwater, and stared intently at the ground for a long time as if he could see something beneath the surface. He looked shaken, Bryant would later say, as if heat were rising from beneath him. This became the basis for the first version of the story: heat disorientation. According to the rescuers' logic, Floyd could have become overheated, disoriented, lost his sense of direction, and gone in the wrong direction. But even then, the question remains, where did he go if everything, even his boots, was left behind? He couldn't have walked miles across bare ground barefoot. If he had sat down, lain down, or fallen, he could have been found from the air. But none of the devices detected even a heat signature. The air humidity that day was low. The heat was almost record-breaking, but all this would only explain disorientation, not disappearance. There was another version proposed by a group of geologists who had been exploring the Shivwitz Plateau since the early 2000s. Beneath the section of the trail where Floyd was last seen, there are a number of microfractures associated with ancient karst sinkholes. In theory, a person could have fallen into one of them if the thin surface beneath him had collapsed. But in reality, no such cracks were recorded at the point of disappearance, either before or after. Most importantly, There was not even a collapsed edge or the slightest sign of mechanical displacement. A few months later, Floyd Roberts' disappearance began to be compared to other cases that had occurred in Arizona canyons and southern Utah under similar circumstances. Tourists, hunters, and sometimes even park employees suddenly disappeared, without a sound, without a trace of a struggle, without a clue. In some cases, as here, neatly arranged belongings were found at the scene, as if their owner had simply taken them and left. In others, there were details that were difficult to explain rationally. Footprints leading into thin air, or glowing soil, as some eyewitnesses reported. Some enthusiasts suggested that there were local geophysical anomalies on the plateau, pockets of high temperature or magnetic deviation capable of causing temporary disorientation, auditory hallucinations, and even temporary memory loss. This hypothesis was discussed at length in narrow circles, but there was no evidence to support it. Proponents of supernatural theories spoke of invasions and disappearance zones, citing similar cases in Yellowstone and the Sierra Nevada mountains. However, official agencies did not confirm any of these assumptions. An important role was played by a detail that many initially considered accidental. Floyd's backpack found at the scene was zipped up, as if the man had left it there deliberately, rather than dropping or losing it. All his belongings were arranged logically: water, a flashlight, spare socks, a first aid kit. This is not what happens in a fall or sudden panic. This is what happens when someone leaves, slowly. Only he did not return. June 2nd, 2015, a hot day in the heart of the Grand Canyon, promised to be a normal day for Morgan Heimer, a 22-year-old river guide with a reputation as a professional who knew the Colorado River like the back of his hand. Tall, blonde, and blue-eyed, he was leading a group of tourists on a commercial rafting trip with Tour West. The 6th day of the 8-day trip had passed without incident, and the group stopped at River Mile 213, not far from the ominous Pumpkin Springs, a travertine dome oozing poisonous water, saturated with arsenic and heavy metals. The atmosphere was lighthearted. Tourists laughed and jumped from a low cliff into the cool river, while Heimer, as always, was at the center of the action, organizing entertainment and ensuring safety. But in an instant, everything changed. After another customer jumped, the head guide spoke briefly with Morgan, suggesting he take a break after lunch. The conversation lasted only a few seconds. The head guide turned away to answer a tourist question, and when he turned back, Morgan was gone. Not a sound, not a splash, not the slightest hint of where he had gone. He had simply vanished, as if the canyon had swallowed him up, leaving no trace. At first, no one panicked. Morgan was an experienced guide, and his absence could be explained by something simple. Perhaps he had stepped away on business or decided to go for a swim. But when he didn't return for dinner, the group began to grow anxious. The guides and tourists started calling for him, their voices echoing off the ancient walls of the canyon, but there was no response. They searched the shore, peering into the twilight, but found neither his bright blue plaid shirt, nor his Chaco sandals, nor his burgundy baseball cap, nor even his purple water bottle. At 7:26 p.m., the head guide contacted the National Park Service via satellite phone to report him missing. At dawn on June 3rd, a massive search operation began. Helicopters circled the river, rangers and rescuers combed the banks and tamarisk thickets, battling the scorching heat and treacherous terrain. The search covered 14 miles of river and 4 miles of shoreline. All commercial and private groups passing by were given flyers with Morgan's photo. But as the days passed, hope faded. Nothing was found. Not the body, not the life jacket that Morgan, as a guide should, always wore. This fact made the situation even more inexplicable. The vest should have kept him afloat even if he had lost consciousness, but the river remained silent, taking with it the secret of his disappearance. The search operation in the Grand Canyon was one of the most thorough in the park's history. Rangers, rescuers, and volunteers worked in grueling conditions. The scorching sun sapped their strength, Thick tamarisk bushes clung to their clothes, and huge boulders and steep slopes made every step a challenge. Helicopters methodically circled the river, scanning every bend in the shoreline, while ground teams combed every accessible area. Boat crews checked rapids and quiet backwaters, hoping to find the slightest trace. But the Colorado River, as if mocking their efforts, gave no clues. Not a scrap of clothing, not a piece of equipment, not even a hint that a human had been here recently. The most perplexing aspect of the case remained Morgan's life jacket. Dark, Astral brand, a mandatory piece of river guide equipment. Designed to keep a person afloat even in the most turbulent waters, this jacket made the drowning theory highly unlikely. If Morgan had fallen into the river, his body, or at least his vest, should have floated to the surface and been spotted within hours, if not days. The current could have carried him downstream, but not far enough to remain undetected in the 14-mile search area. Moreover, despite its rapids, the river in this area was not impassable for rescue teams equipped with boats and helicopters. The absence of a body or life jacket stumped even the most experienced rangers. By June 8th, after 6 days of intensive searching, the National Park Service made the difficult decision to end the active phase of the operation. The case was transferred to permanent but limited status, meaning that rangers would continue to look for signs of Morgan while on patrol, but the full-scale operation was over. The next day, June 9th, Morgan's parents were taken to the spot where he disappeared. They stood on the riverbank staring into the waters that had taken their son but left no answer. That moment became a bitter symbol of powerlessness in the face of the inexplicable. Theories about what might have happened to Morgan multiplied, but none of them could explain all the oddities. The most obvious hypothesis, that he slipped and fell into the river, where he was pulled under a rock ledge or into an underwater cavity, was complicated by the presence of his life jacket. Even if the current had trapped his body underwater, in the years since 2015, the river, known for its seasonal changes, should have washed something ashore, a piece of clothing, a shoe, or a life jacket. But nothing was found even a decade later. The idea that Morgan could have left on foot seemed even less plausible. The disappearance site was in one of the most inaccessible parts of the canyon, surrounded by sheer cliffs and dense vegetation. Without equipment, water, or training, such an escape would have been tantamount to suicide. The official report of the Park Service categorically ruled out this version, finding no evidence of an attempt to escape from the canyon. The hypothesis of a wild animal attack was also quickly dismissed. Attacks are extremely rare in the Grand Canyon, especially ones that could lead to a person disappearing without a trace of blood, a struggle, or remains. The crime theory seemed just as far-fetched. Surrounded by co-workers and tourists in an open space, it would be almost impossible to do something like that and hide the body. There were no hints of a criminal trail in the case. Morgan Heimer's disappearance became one of the Grand Canyon's deepest mysteries. He was not a novice, not a careless tourist, not a man who could underestimate danger. He was a professional who knew the river better than most people know their own homes. And yet, the canyon took him in an instant, leaving no trace behind. His story is not just a mystery, but a sinister reminder that nature, no matter how familiar it may seem, always holds an unfathomable power. Morgan Heimer became a ghost of the Colorado River, his name echoing in the canyon where the mystery of his disappearance continues to elude all who try to solve it. That's all for now, friends. If these stories made your heart beat faster, like, subscribe, and share the video with your friends. See you in the next episode. In the wild corners of America, where canyons hold centuries-old secrets, two mysterious stories unfolded. At the edge of the Grand Canyon stands a lone white Toyota Camry, and its owner, Jongyong Won, has vanished without a trace in this vast and harsh place. Hundreds of miles away, in the narrow red corridors of Antelope Canyon, a sudden flash flood claimed the lives of 11 tourists, leaving only one survivor. Today you will hear these crazy and mysterious stories about people who disappeared in the heart of the Grand Canyon and how nature can be both beautiful and merciless at the same time. Like, share the video with your friends and immerse yourself in these incredible stories. On September 17, 2017, a white Toyota Camry was parked at Moran Point, a viewpoint on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The car was locked, without a scratch, clean as if it had just come from the dealership. There were no traces, no belongings, no witnesses. No one saw the driver leave the car. This place, named after artist Thomas Moran, offers a view of the canyon, layers of ancient rock descending to the Colorado River, where the dark schist of Vishnu and the pink granite of Zoroaster are visible. It is a landscape that reminds us how small humans are compared to millions of years of geological history. The car belonged to Jongyong Won, a 45-year-old resident of Los Angeles. He arrived at Grand Canyon National Park and disappeared. His car is the only clue left in the case. The National Park Service, NPS, has recorded that Won is missing, and his case remains unsolved. How could a person simply disappear in one of the most visited yet wildest places on Earth? Little is known about Jongyong Won. According to the NPS, he was a 45-year-old man of Asian descent, 67 inches tall, weighing 120 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. He lived in Los Angeles, California. He sometimes used the name Daniel online. His car, a white Toyota Camry, was found in the parking lot at Moran Point. The only social media account found was a Facebook page with two photos from 2016, one of the city and another selfie, possibly taken in the same car. Another page in Korean, also under the name Daniel, had only 5 friends. For someone living in Los Angeles in 2017, this is unusually few. One left almost no digital footprint. This could mean that he was either deliberately avoiding attention, had recently moved to the US, and had not had time to make connections, or lived a very secluded life. The only clue about his life before his disappearance is an incident 4 months earlier, on May 5, 2017, in Knoxville, Illinois. At 2:22 a.m., a police officer nearly crashed into a white car that failed to yield at an intersection. Jongyong Won was behind the wheel. He said he was on his way to New York and that the car belonged to his nephew. No one checked his story. One spoke poor English, so the police called an interpreter and a drug-sniffing dog. The dog reacted, and 11.67 grams of marijuana and digital scales were found in the car. One said the marijuana was a gift from a friend in California. He was arrested for possession of drugs, drug paraphernalia, and traffic violations. In Illinois in 2017, these were serious charges that could have led to a year in prison, fines, or even problems with immigration status. This arrest is the only time we see Won alive. A nighttime drive across the country, a language barrier, a search, and an arrest are extremely stressful. If Vaughn was part of a Korean community where such incidents could be considered shameful, it could have had a profound effect on him. He may have felt shame, fear, or despair. This episode could have been the catalyst that led him to the Grand Canyon 4 months later. But questions remain. Who is the nephew he mentioned? What happened with the arrest, and why didn't his family or friends look for him? There is no mention in the reports of anyone actively searching for Won. This is strange and common in cases referred to as Missing 411, unexplained disappearances in the wilderness. To understand what happened to Vaughn, you need to look at where he disappeared. His car was found in a parking lot at Moran Point, but there are reports that it was seen earlier at the start of the New Hands Trail. This trail does not have its own parking lot, and tourists often leave their cars at Moran Point and walk to the trail. This suggests that Vaughn most likely headed there. The New Hands Trail is not for beginners. The NPS calls it the most difficult trail on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. It is steep with loose soil, scree, and ledges to navigate. The trail is poorly marked, and you have to navigate by stone pyramids. There is no water on the route, and there are cliffs along the way, which are deadly if you fall. Even experienced hikers tell stories of getting lost, suffering from dehydration, or getting stuck on the rocks. On that day, September 17, 2017, the weather was normal. but the temperature in the canyon is higher than above, and the risk of heat stroke or dehydration is high. If Vaughn fell or died of exhaustion, why wasn't his body found? The Grand Canyon is full of scavengers, condors, coyotes, mountain lions that quickly remove remains. But even that doesn't explain everything. The canyon is a place where it's easy to get lost. Its size, silence, and strange sound effects can be disorienting. If Vaughn was stressed after his arrest, a solo hike on such a trail could have been too much for him. Not only physically, but also psychologically. Vaughn's case stands out not only because of his disappearance, but also because of how little has been said about him. The NPS launched an investigation, but it quickly moved to the Bureau of Investigation's list of unresolved cases. Unlike other cases of people missing in the Grand Canyon, there is almost no public information about Vaughn. For example, the cases of Floyd Roberts, 2016, and Sarah Beadle, 2017, were accompanied by news reports and search updates. Vaughn, however, only received a brief mention on the NPS website. Investigations in the Grand Canyon are being conducted by the NPS and the Coconino County Sheriff's Office, but it is difficult to obtain documents related to Vaughn's case. Official requests are required, and they are often expensive. The NPS does not have a unified database of missing persons, and requests under the Freedom of Information Act are often denied due to high fees. This is not a conspiracy, but a systemic problem that prevents families and the public from learning the truth. The Vaughn case is an example of how a person can disappear not only in a canyon, but also in a bureaucratic maze. The Vaughn case is reminiscent of other disappearances in the Grand Canyon. For example, the case of Floyd Roberts III, who went missing in 2016. Both were middle-aged men. Won was 45, Roberts was 52. Both were alone and both disappeared on difficult trails. One on the New Hants Trail, Roberts on the Shivwitz Plateau. The weather in both cases was not extreme, but difficult. The search yielded no results except for Won's car. These coincidences raise the question, is this a coincidence or something more? There are two explanations. The first is simple. Vaughn may have been in crisis after his arrest. He decided to go on a solo hike on a dangerous trail without preparation and died from a fall, dehydration, or heat stroke. Nature quickly covered up the traces. The second explanation is more complicated. The arrest in Illinois, the absence of family and friends, the silence of the authorities, the similarities with other cases, the strange atmosphere of the canyon. All this creates the feeling that there are more questions than answers here. The Grand Canyon is a place where sounds are distorted, and the scale is overwhelming. For indigenous peoples such as the Hopi, it is a sacred place associated with spirits and the other world. There are even stories of paranormal phenomena, ghosts or strange lights in the sky. The case of Jongyong Won remains a mystery. The white Toyota Camry in the parking lot at Moran Point is the last trace of the man who disappeared. Was it an accident caused by stress and unpreparedness, or something stranger connected to the canyon itself? There are no answers, only the silence of the Grand Canyon which keeps its secrets. Antelope Canyon is not just a gorge in the desert. For the Navajo people, it is a sacred place they call Hasdestwazi, or spiral rock arches. Its red sandstone walls, smooth as if polished, were created by water over thousands of years. When the sun's rays penetrate through narrow slits above, the canyon is transformed into a temple of light. The walls come to life, shimmering with shades of pink, orange, and red. This place attracts photographers and travelers from all over the world who want to see its beauty. On August 12, 1997, a group of 12 people descended into the canyon. Their guide was 28-year-old Francisco Pancho Quintana, who worked for Trek America. The group consisted of 7 French people, 2 Americans from New Orleans and California, 1 Briton, and 1 Swede. 5 of them were traveling on Trek America's grand tour from Denver to Los Angeles, while the others joined on their own. Among them was a French couple whose story makes the tragedy particularly poignant. Their 2 daughters, aged 8 and 13, were left at a motel in the town of Page. The girls did not want to go on the hike and waited for their parents, unaware that they would never see them again. This detail turns the story of a group of tourists into a personal family tragedy. The day was clear and sunny. The sky above the canyon was blue, and there was no rain. The group descended into lower Antelope Canyon on simple wooden ladders attached to the rocks. Everything looked safe: silence, beauty, clear weather. But this safety was deceptive. What the group saw, a calm, sun-drenched canyon, hid the danger that was brewing dozens of miles away. Their decision to continue was based on what they saw with their own eyes, but that was not enough. The danger of slot canyons like Antelope is related to the nature of the desert. The ground here is hard and absorbs almost no water. When it rains, water flows across the surface, collects in streams, and rushes into low-lying areas such as canyons. The canyon itself, carved out of soft sandstone, acts like a funnel, intensifying the flow of water and turning it into a destructive force. On that day, during the monsoon season, a severe thunderstorm began 15 miles from the canyon. A short but powerful downpour dumped tons of water on the ground. This torrent, rolling down the dry riverbed, became not just water but a wall of mud, rocks, ash, and trees. The height of this wall, according to various estimates, reached from 12 to 50 feet. Was there a warning? This question became key after the tragedy. Clarence Gorman, director of Navajo Nation Parks, said that guides in Upper Canyon noticed a small stream of water around 3:30 p.m. and immediately closed their section. One of the guides allegedly ran to Lower Canyon and warned local guide Ella Young and the tourists not to go any further. Gorman also said that Young had broken the rules by not accompanying the group personally, and hinted that foreigners often stubbornly pursue their goals. Trek America, Quintana's company, claimed that there was no clear warning. According to them, Quintana checked with local operators to see if it was safe to go, and they told him that everything was fine. Later, on an internet forum, a man calling himself Pancho Quintana wrote that he had decided to stay with the group rather than escape alone. This suggests a different version of events. These discrepancies show that the system was not working. In 1997, tourism in the canyon was poorly organized. 3 parties were responsible for it: the Navajo Nation, the Yang family who owned the tour rights, and Trek America. There was no unified plan of action. No one could quickly close the canyon and control it. The storm was the cause of the tragedy, but the main problem was the confusion. By 4 p.m., a powerful flash flood caused by a thunderstorm 15 miles from the canyon hit the group. Late in the evening, the only survivor, Pancho Quintana, was found, and the search for the others began. The first signs of trouble were almost imperceptible: a strange wind, murky water, and a low rumble like the sound of a train. The group had only a few seconds to realize what was happening. Then came a wall of water, not just a stream, but a wave of mud, rocks, and debris rushing at tremendous speed, filling the narrow canyon. There was nowhere to run. The smooth walls offered no footholds, and the wooden ladders leading to the top were instantly washed away. Thanks to his experience of being rescued from raging rivers, Quinta tried to pull people up onto ledges, but the water tore them away one by one, as he later described in his book, Breathe for Me. His own survival was a miracle. The current threw him against the walls and pulled him into whirlpools, but at some point one of them held him, and then the water pushed him out of the narrow part of the canyon. Surviving in such a torrent is a matter of luck, not strength or skill. His rescue was called a small miracle, but it only highlights how much stronger nature is than man. The only way to avoid death is not to be in the canyon. When the water receded, the canyon was empty and silent. The rescue operation, led by Coconino County Sheriff Ron Anderson, focused on the canyon's exit, where it flows into Lake Powell. There, a pile of mud and debris about 330 feet long and up to 5 feet deep had formed. With the help of dogs, the first bodies were found. The force of the water was so strong that it tore off people's clothes, shoes, and even their documents. The final toll was 11 dead, 6 women and 5 men, and 1 survivor. Among the dead were a French couple whose daughters, aged 8 and 13, were left orphaned and were handed over to Child Protective Services. The canyon did not give up all of its victims. Swedish man Anders Wasenius and Frenchman Thierry Castella were never found. Wasenius had a titanium pin in his hand, and rescuers hoped to locate it with a metal detector, but the search was unsuccessful. This was a heavy burden for Quintana. For years he returned to the canyon, searching for the missing, feeling responsible. 7 years later he said, "This is the last time, we won't find them." His search was not only physical, but also an attempt to cope with survivors' guilt. The canyon, which did not return all of its victims, seemed to remind everyone of its power, leaving behind pain for their loved ones and for Quintana, which will never go away. The tragedy of 1997 shook the world. The summer of 1997 in Arizona was dangerous. In 37 days, 22 people died in 5 flash floods. But the incident in Antelope Canyon, where many foreigners died, received worldwide attention. It showed how dangerous slot canyons can be. After the tragedy, the canyon was closed, and the Navajo Nation made it a tribal park, placing it under strict control. Free access ended. Since August 13, 1997, only certified Navajo guides are allowed into the canyon. Ken's tours became an example of change. After the closure, the canyon suffered from vandalism, and the Yang family, who had previously run tours, agreed to return on the condition that sturdy steel ladders be built and secured to the rock. These ladders replaced the old wooden ones and became a symbol of the new rules. The tragedy changed the Navajo Nation's approach to tourism. Previously, everything was fragmented, but now there is a clear management system. This has given locals more control over their land, linking income to responsibility for safety and heritage preservation. New safety measures include mandatory certified Navajo guides, steel ladders instead of wooden ones, weather monitoring via NOAA radio stations and sirens, and unified control of Navajo parks instead of fragmented management. Today, a memorial plaque stands at the entrance to the canyon in memory of the 11 who died. Their story has become part of this place. Antelope Canyon is still beautiful, but now it is visited under strict rules, reminding us that in the desert, water is life, but it can also be death. That's all for now, friends. Just imagine what other terrifying secrets the Grand Canyon holds. Like, comment, and share your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss out on new mysteries and incredible stories. The Grand Canyon is not just one of the most famous natural wonders in the United States. It is a living, breathing organism with a centuries-old history of disappearances, tragedies, and silent indifference to human presence. Tourists who come here often marvel at its scale and beauty, but few realize how quickly and irreversibly its fate can change. One such case, which remains unsolved to this day, is the disappearance of Sandra Jean Mitchell in the summer of 1993. Sandra, a 34-year-old resident of Albuquerque, New Mexico, arrived at the national park with 2 friends, Janice Walsh and Robert Carter. According to her loved ones, she was an experienced person. This was not her first trip to the Grand Canyon. She was familiar with the climate, knew how to navigate, and never took unnecessary risks. The group planned to spend 2 nights camping on the banks of the Colorado River, descending via the Bright Angel Trail, and then returning the same way. They arrived on June 18th and set up their tents in a designated area near the Pipe Creek Recreation Campground, which was quite popular, but not overcrowded at the time. The weather was stable, warm, and windless. According to Janice, the day passed quietly. They managed to swim in the river, cook dinner, and sit around the campfire until dark. No one noticed anything unusual. No strangers, no strange noises, no smells. Sandra behaved as usual. She laughed, discussed plans for the morning, and according to her friends, went to bed first around 9:30 p.m. The tents were lined up in a row, a few feet apart. On the morning of June 19th, around 6 a.m., Janice went outside and noticed that the zipper on Sandra's tent was open. This seemed strange to her. Sandra usually closed her tent tightly at night. Inside, there was no flashlight, no shoes, and no Sandra. At first, Janice thought her friend had simply gotten up early and gone to the river, but after 20 minutes, her absence became alarming. Robert joined the search, and soon they realized that Sandra was nowhere to be found. According to the instructions, if a hiker does not return within an hour, the rangers must be notified. Janice and Robert contacted the nearest communication station and reported the disappearance at around 8 a.m. The first search party arrived at the camp by 10 a.m. They began searching the area and quickly found the first, and as it turned out, the only evidence of Sandra's movements. 650 feet from the tent, on the trail leading up the bank, lay her flashlight. It was broken. The plastic casing was cracked and the batteries had fallen out. There were no signs of a struggle and no shoes or footprints were found nearby. The strangest thing was that there were no clear footprints leading from the tent to the flashlight. The ground in that spot was dry and hard, and investigators believed that a person could have walked there without leaving any obvious traces, especially if they moved carefully. But it was quite cool that night, and Sandra left the tent without a jacket. All her belongings, including food supplies, medicine, and documents, remained in place. There was also water left in the tent, a canister that was almost full. The search was complicated by the fact that the area was rugged and difficult to navigate, with bushes, boulders, and loose slopes. Rangers, volunteers, and a helicopter combed the perimeter within a half-mile radius of the camp, but to no avail. Thermal imaging cameras, dogs, and even local guides who were familiar with people's behavior under stress were used, but no new clues were found. Sandra's parents were notified immediately and arrived at the park 2 days later. According to them, Sandra had never suffered from mental illness or anxiety attacks, and she was certainly not prone to nighttime excursions. They also noted that she was afraid of snakes and would not have left the tent unless absolutely necessary. Her behavior in the evening before her disappearance did not indicate any cause for alarm. The official report, published 2 weeks after the active search phase ended, stated, "There is no evidence as to where Sandra Jean Mitchell may have gone after leaving the campsite, as well as no signs of a violent incident or contact with strangers." The report emphasizes that the case remains open and will not be closed as an accident, suicide, or intentional departure until additional information is received. 2 months later, in August, one of the park's seasonal workers reported seeing a woman resembling Sandra in one of the areas along the canyon. However, this information was not confirmed upon investigation. Moreover, it turned out that on that day, there were no tourists matching the woman's description registered in the area. This sparked a wave of rumors, but none of these versions were officially confirmed. Despite dozens of hours spent searching the surrounding area, enlisting volunteers and technical resources, the disappearance of Sandra Jean Mitchell remained unexplained. No clothing, no traces, not even basic personal items. Nothing else was found either in the summer or in the months that followed. The park continued to patrol passively, rangers carrying an archive photo of Sandra with them, occasionally checking with tourists, fishermen, and private boaters. Every find, whether it was an abandoned backpack, a piece of fabric, or a blurred footprint on the trail, was checked, but none of them had anything to do with the case. Psychologists familiar with similar incidents suggested that the woman may have suffered a sudden bout of disorientation, perhaps due to a sharp drop in blood sugar or heat stroke. However, this theory did not stand up to scrutiny. Sandra was healthy, active, felt fine on the day she disappeared, and had not complained of feeling unwell. She left the tent lightly dressed, without a water bottle, food, or documents, as if she had stepped out for a moment, and she did not return. Among all the trails in the Grand Canyon, South Kaibab stands out not only for its picturesque straightness and panoramic views, but also for the fact that it seems completely transparent to observation. It is a dry, open slope carved in zigzags into the southern wall of the canyon. There is little cover, little vegetation, and almost no places where a person could disappear unnoticed, especially in good weather and with perfect visibility. But it was in this very section, in the early morning hours of September 14, 1989, that a 27-year-old tourist named Kevin Thomas Lloyd disappeared. An engineer from Albuquerque, New Mexico, he came to the Grand Canyon with 2 friends, Brian Hills and Roy Kramer, whom he had known since college. The trip had been planned for a long time, a 3-day hike with overnight camping on the Colorado River. The group arrived at the park in a rented car and registered their route at the visitor center. On the morning of September 14th, they began their descent of South Kai Bob at around 8:10 a.m. The weather was clear and the temperature was comfortable. They moved at a moderate pace, stopping occasionally to take photos. Kevin was carrying a medium-sized backpack, a water bottle, a light jacket, and a bandana around his neck. He was walking last, taking pictures of the canyon with an old camera. Around 9 a.m., they reached the section between Cedar Ridge and Oo-Ah Point, one of the most open and frequently visited spots on the route. It was here, on a flat section of the trail, that Kevin fell behind by just a few feet to, according to Brian, tie his shoelaces. They walked ahead literally 15 to 20 steps, and when they turned around, Kevin was gone. At first, they didn't think much of it. They figured he had just lingered or turned aside to take a picture or relieve himself. 10 minutes later, they returned along the trail calling out to him, but there was no response. The trail was completely empty. For the first 30 minutes, they searched on their own. They went down a little further along the route, then climbed back up to the last point where he had fallen behind. There were no traces, no backpack, no movement, no sound of footsteps. When almost an hour had passed, Brian decided to go back up and report the possible disappearance to the ranger station at South Rim Village. By 11:30, the first park security officers arrived at the scene. Over the next few hours, an emergency search operation was launched. Duty crews and some rangers were called in, and 2 trackers with dogs were summoned from Tucson. By 3 p.m., a helicopter began flying over the area, but there was no indication of Kevin's possible route. Neither from the air nor from the ground was it possible to find any clothing or traces of him leaving the trail. The soil in this area is dusty with sparse pebbles. Any deviation from the trail should have left at least some footprints, but there were none. The dogs lost the trail just a few feet from where Kevin was last seen. There were no caves or crevices nearby where a person could have fallen, and the visual range was almost perfect for dozens of feet in front and behind. The search continued throughout the first night. The group remained at camp while several patrols searched the surrounding area, including the foothills and nearby slopes. But even at night, as the temperature dropped, there was no cry, no sound of footsteps, no accidental noise that could indicate the location of a person in distress. The next day, more than 40 people, including volunteers, joined the search. They expanded the radius, checked steep slopes, examined hollows under ledges, and called in climbers to check hard-to-reach niches. There were no signs of life. Kevin's parents arrived at the park on the 3rd day, when his disappearance had already made headlines in the local press. They insisted on visiting the trail where their son had disappeared. Kevin's mother, Judith, later told reporters, "I don't understand how a person can disappear in a place where everything is visible as clear as day." And that was the main paradox of this story. Kevin Lloyd disappeared in a completely open space with perfect visibility on a trail where dozens of other tourists passed by during the day. None of them noticed anything unusual. The official search lasted 9 days. Every square foot of the trail between Cedar Ridge and Skeleton Point was searched, to no avail. The only official conclusion was, the site of the disappearance shows no signs of foul play, a fall, or voluntary departure. But no one could explain what had happened. 2 weeks later, the case was classified as an unresolved disappearance. Posters with Kevin's face hung in the Grand Canyon Visitor Center for almost 6 months. Then, in May 1991, a group of tourists from the University of Arizona, walking along a nearby side trail, noticed something resembling a skull in the bushes. It was discolored, partially covered with sand and moss, and lying under the roots of a tree about 5 miles from the disappearance site. At first, they thought it was the remains of a coyote or other animal, but when one of them noticed that the skull was clearly human, they called the rangers. A week later, forensic examination confirmed that, based on DNA and dental records, the remains were those of Kevin Lloyd. No other bones were found nearby, no clothes, no shoes, no backpack, just a single skull lying cleanly at the foot of a tree, far from the main trail. At the time the skull was found, almost 2 years had passed since Kevin's disappearance. All that could be established with certainty was that the skull did indeed belong to him. All other questions remained unanswered. How did he end up 5 miles from where he was last seen? Why were no other remains found? Why was there no clothing, no shoes, no signs that the body had been lying in the open for 2 years? The place where the skull was found was itself suspicious. It was located in a remote, inaccessible ravine off the beaten track. To get there, one had to pass through dense yucca thickets and sharp bushes, then cross a dry riverbed that had collapsed after rains. For an unprepared person, especially without a map or equipment, it was almost impossible to get there. Most importantly, in the first weeks after the disappearance, the area had been searched by rangers, who found nothing. The investigation then turned to forensic experts to determine whether the skull could have been moved by predators. But here, too, everything was inconclusive. There were no bite marks or damage characteristic of dragging. The skull lay too neatly, right on the surface, partially covered with autumn leaves and sand. It looked more like someone had deliberately placed it there than a random coincidence. Kevin's parents, upon learning of the discovery, returned to the canyon. His father, Harold Lloyd, told a local television station, "We have received no answers, no comfort. We have only received a part. Everything else is gone with him." The investigation attempted to reconstruct the chronology of events, compare possible trajectories, and requested data on seismic activity, possible underground cavities, and animal movements. But none of the theories were confirmed. The area where Kevin disappeared was stable, with no landslides or ground movements recorded in the vicinity, and even records of large predators such as cougars and coyotes yielded nothing. The uncertainty of the situation soon gave rise to a wave of rumors. Some locals recalled other cases of disappearances in the canyon, cases where, despite massive searches, people could not be found. One ranger, speaking privately, said in an article in the Arizona Daily Sun, "If I didn't know that trail like the back of my hand, I'd think he fell through the ground." Another park employee, who wished to remain anonymous, said that in the Cedar Ridge area, compasses sometimes behave strangely, and that even experienced guides have gotten lost several times. A psychological evaluation conducted as part of the investigation ruled out the possibility of intentional departure or suicide. Neither friends, relatives, nor colleagues indicated any signs of depression or instability. Kevin was an avid hiker, physically fit, had good coordination, and knew how to behave on a hike. After all, he was not a loner. He disappeared right in the middle of his friends on an open trail. The official report, released in January 1992, concluded with the following statement: "Cause of death, undetermined. Place of death, undetermined. Mechanism of disappearance, undetermined." Inside the park, his case was kept in a closed archive until 2001. Since then, it has been classified as historically closed, although Kevin Lloyd's case remains open legally. His disappearance has been the subject of discussion among independent researchers of anomalous cases. His name is mentioned in several compilations about people who have disappeared in national parks. Some have compared his case to others where all traces of a person simply disappeared. Cases in Shenandoah Park, in the Lassen area, and on the Pacific Crest Trail. In each of these cases, the same pattern was absent. A person left the group with minimal distance and disappeared without a trace. No falls, no screams, no clues. What happened to Kevin Lloyd on that clear September morning in 1989 remains a mystery to this day. His disappearance remains one of the most bizarre and inexplicable in the history of the South Rim of the Grand Canyon. In Grand Canyon National Park, Arizona, the Tonto Plateau is known for its challenging trails, hot climate, and desolate landscapes. It is not the most popular trail among casual hikers, but it is well known among experienced hikers who prefer solitude and demand a real challenge from a trail. One such experienced hiker, Edward Robert Lawrence, a resident of Albuquerque, New Mexico, set out there in August 1990. He knew the area, was well prepared, and had hiked solo routes through the canyon many times before. Edward was 52 years old. He was a retired electrical engineer, a former military man, a widower, and had no children. Tourism and cartography were his hobbies. He had been to Arizona many times, kept detailed route notes, used paper maps and a compass, and avoided GPS, which was not unusual at the time. His diaries contained dozens of sketches of the area, and his notebooks contained the exact coordinates of his previous campsites. On August 17th, he arrived at the southern tip of the canyon and registered at the visitor center, indicating the estimated duration of his trip, 4 days along the southeastern section of the Tonto Plateau, with overnight stays at key water sources. On August 21st, the day he was supposed to return to his starting point, Edward did not show up. According to instructions, rangers were to wait at least 24 hours before taking any action. But the next morning they were approached by tourists who were expecting to meet him at the junction of the trails. Edward had promised to show them an old well he mentioned in his diary. He did not show up. He also failed to contact the local forestry office where he was supposed to confirm his return. The search operation began on August 23rd. The first thing they found was his parked car at the trailhead, in a parking lot with no signs of forced entry. Inside were only empty bottles, documents, and an old backpack. The next discovery came fairly quickly. On the first day of the aerial search, a helicopter spotted a strange straight line on the ground, resembling footprints running along the southern ridge of the plateau. A group of 3 people walked to the spot and confirmed that the prints belonged to an adult wearing hiking boots. The shoe size matched Edward's. The tracks stretched for about 2,500 feet, then ended abruptly on a flat rocky area, with no signs of a fall, bloodstains, or drag marks. There were no scratches on the rocks, no signs of a struggle or outside interference. The surrounding area was clean. This place became key. The trail there intersects with an ancient dry gully, climbs up to a flat terrace, and heads off toward a sparsely populated canyon. All escape routes were clearly visible from the air, and no one, not investigators, rangers, or volunteers, could understand how a person could have disappeared literally 5 feet from a solid rock platform. There was no vegetation to hide in. There were no cliffs to fall off either. Below was only a dry canyon with no water. The search lasted 6 days. Helicopters surveyed more than 9 miles in radius. Dog handlers combed the ground, and geologists were even called in to assess the possibility of hidden sinkholes. But no backpack, no clothing, not even traces of a temporary camp were found. Edward Lawrence's name was entered into the federal missing persons database, and the case was closed as an unexplained disappearance. 4 years passed. In May 1994, a group of geology students from Northern Arizona University were conducting research on geothermal sites in remote areas of the canyon when one of them stumbled upon an abandoned camp. The site was about 10 miles from where Lawrence's tracks had been found. The camp was located in a remote hollow with no water, accessible only by compass or map. The tent was destroyed. The fabric rotted away. Inside lay half-decayed books, a notebook, a battered canteen, and the remains of plastic packaging from freeze-dried food. Everything pointed to the camp belonging to Edward Lawrence. An examination confirmed that the finds had been lying in the sun and rain for at least 3 years. However, no skeletal remains or other signs of the man's presence were found. The items were laid out neatly, as if the man had planned to spend the night and return soon. No wolf tracks or other animal tracks were found nearby. The FBI and the National Park Service reopened the case. The official version of death by dehydration was considered, but many factors spoke against it. The location of the camp was extremely irrational, without access to water, in a hot area where an experienced tourist would not go. Edward himself did not suffer from mental illness, did not take medication, and had military and hiking experience. Nevertheless, no one could explain how he ended up in such a place when his tracks ended dozens of miles from where the camp was found. Lawrence's case still appears on a number of lists of unexplained disappearances within U.S. national parks. His story is not just the tragedy of a single tourist. It is a reminder that even the most familiar trails can turn into a trap. There was no storm on the Tonto Plateau, no criminals, no predators. Only a man, the desert, and the emptiness that closed in on him at some point. That's all for now, friends. If you're interested in what else national parks have to offer, like, subscribe, and remember, sometimes all it takes is a second to look back and never return.